Hi, good evening, Shalom. It's Mayor Weinstein. I'm joined with Mideast experts, Mayor Jolovitz. We're going to be talking tonight in this segment regarding the Trump-Iran deal. We'll see what this means, whether it's whether it's going to be something positive, negative, a bluff, something in between. We don't know, but we're watching this very carefully right now, as people in Israel definitely are watching this. What's happening right now, Mayor? I'm sure you've been glued to the news all day. What could you tell us? How are you reading this proposal from President Donald Trump?
Yeah. As a general rule, when one tries to forecast what might happen uh, in this game, one has a premise or several premises, and based on the premise, one can draw certain logical conclusions as far as to what the conclusion is going to be. Premise. In this particular case, we've been hearing some inconsistent comments from all sides as to whether or not there really is some kind of negotiation that's going on. They are, what we've heard is incompatible. And therefore, it's very hard for us to forecast what's going on. The one thing, and I'll begin with the criticism, is if in fact it's true that there is some kind of negotiation, and the negotiations are being conducted, as some sources tell us, by Steve Witkoff and Jared Kushner, I am not happy. I'm not happy at all. The left has criticized them as two real estate people, and that's what they are. They don't understand, and I've often said they've never read the Quran. They don't understand the other side. But allow me to begin with a very important thing. There are three parties at play as far as our analysis is concerned. There's Israel, there's Iran, and there's the United States. We very much know what the end goal is for each of them, and they're not the same. For Israel, the end goal is, whether they proclaim it loudly or not, it's regime change. It's the end of 47 years of Ayatollah, of Islamic, what they call radical Islam, which is foolish. It's Islam. And what we're talking about is a regime change minimally in order for us to have a more peaceful Middle East, a region that somehow isn't always at conflict. For the United States, the end goal is somewhat different. It's to have a Middle East that's not destabilized. They want a more stable Middle East. If that means having Iran deprived of its nuclear military ambitions, then so be it. And there is also a factor that we haven't spent enough time talking about, that there is an end game that also includes the fact that the United States, particularly Donald Trump, is trying to minimize, negate, and somehow offset the influence that China has been making into the region. So whereas for Israel, openly they say, yes, we want regime change, the United States says we don't necessarily want regime change. And then there's the third player. That third player, of course, is the Islamic Republic of Iran. And the one thing that we know, which is an absolute truism of them, what is their end game? To simply survive. There aren't enough people in the Western world to understand that if the Muslims aren't defeated, completely destroyed, then for them it's a victory. And it's something that the Western mind can't wrap itself around. Donald Trump on March 6th, we're talking about what is 17 days ago, said that there were two goals in mind for the United States, and he was quite determined in expressing this intent. The one was what he called, I'm using his language, total victory against Iran. Total victory. And it can be defined different ways. And the other was an unconditional surrender. And he repeated that several times, an unconditional surrender. Well, whatever really is being discussed, whether there are active or some kind of oblique discussions, negotiations, the two things that aren't going to happen, there's not going to be total victory, the way that Trump defined it, and there's not going to be an unconditional surrender. That is not going to happen. And if we look at the lesson of, I was going to say yesteryear, only months ago, a year ago, a year and a half ago, for the Arabs, all Hamas had to do in order to beat Israel, and one could argue that they did, was to survive. And they did, because Israel's end goal at the time was to destroy Hamas. And we spoke about it. The destruction became all of a sudden the defeat. All Hamas had to do was survive, and they did. And their goal, of course, is to survive the little time that Trump still has as president. In fact, it might even be less than that with the midterm elections coming. The same thing happened with Hezbollah. I'm going to remind the audience very quickly that if in fact it's true that the United States has placed pressure on Israel behind the scenes, enough that we've heard about it publicly, that the United States is going to give Iran 5 days to come up with some kind of agreement in which we can put the hostilities to bed, this doesn't bode well for Israel. The United States compelled Israel on November 27, 2024, to do a ceasefire with Hezbollah. Well, how did that turn out?
Right.
In May of 2025, the United States came to an agreement with the Houthis that we would not fire at each other. Mind you, Israel wasn't even involved in the discussions there. And of course, if we go back to the deal that was made with Iran in June of last year, after 12 days of war, a war that Israel was winning, a war that if Israel was allowed to fight another week, would have ended all possible need for a war that we fight today. It was Trump that stepped in and all of a sudden said to Israel, enough. And on the 24th of June of 2025, Israel was forced to engage in a ceasefire for this 12-day war, which would have ended the way that we want things to end now. So we have to remember, and I mean, I could look at other things as well, that in February 4th of 2025, they were talking about, Donald Trump was talking about the fact that the United States was going to take over Gaza. And 11 days later, on February 15th, he and Bibi held a joint conference in which they basically said that they were going to drive all the Gazans, when I say Gazans, Palestinian Arabs in Gaza, out of Gaza. And we were all elated. And of course, that had a very short shelf life. So a lot of the times, the promises that we hear made don't necessarily come to fruition. So we have to be very careful. We don't know what Donald Trump is going to think tomorrow, because Donald Trump doesn't know what he's going to think tomorrow. In this particular case, the one thing that we have to understand is that the end goal for Israel isn't defined in the same way as the end goal is for the United States, and certainly not the way that the end goal is defined by the current regime in Iran.
And one of the end goals that Israel set is that Iran can no longer fund and support proxies against Israel. Now, if there's some kind of an agreement where that's set aside, then what's going on here?
If Israel would be allowed to destroy Iran militarily in the way that we describe it, that you and I describe it, Iran would not be able to finance the proxy war against Israel, whether from Hamas or Hezbollah or the Houthis. But if Israel is stopped short of the destruction of Iran, and Iran, as I said, plays the long game, if all they're doing is waiting for Trump to no longer be president, and they figure that they can deal much better with the future, then we're going to look back and say that this was another missed opportunity. And I've just described a couple of the so-called missed opportunities. But if you look at Trump, I've criticized, you have as well, the Trump Gaza 20-point peace plan, in which the conditions is defined quite clearly by this peace plan, which I always said is a misnomer. It's anything but a peace plan. This board of peace, which is, again, a nonsensical nomenclature, is the fact that Hamas was going to demilitarize, that they were going to put down all their arms. And there was a foolish suggestion, if they voluntarily put down their arms, they would be given amnesty, and so on and so forth. Well, how's that working out? It's working out so well for Hamas that nobody talks about Hamas anymore. The last
Let
time
me
that
add, let me add something to that, Mayor. And the other aspect was also a de-radicalization, like a denazification
yeah,
process. Now, how long would that take? Maybe
yeah,
what, like 50 years, 100 years? In other words, Israel
I,
is forced to live with these
yeah,
Nazis.
yeah.
Yeah.
I think it'll take another 1,400 years, but nonetheless, but to come back to Gaza, when Iran was not yet the major news story, Hamas still was, the war in Gaza was. And Trump assured us then that that the war was over, that we now had, and I quote him again, total peace in the Middle East. Well, we've taken the eye off the ball, but nothing is ended with Hamas, nothing is ended with Gaza, and we need to wake up to the fact that just because we aren't discussing it doesn't mean that it doesn't exist.
Jonathan Pollard, I had him on a couple of times, and he was suggesting, made a comment that Israel should use some unconventional methods of disabling the regime in Iran, and not only that, but Yair Lapid, the official leader of the opposition in Israel, yeah, but he put out a statement about I don't know, maybe 2 weeks ago or a little bit less, that Israel should destroy Karaj Island, which is 90% of the oil, and all the other refineries in Iran. That was Yair Lapid who said that, and I haven't seen that happen yet.
Well,
But the leader of the opposition said that. I
yeah,
ran that by Jonathan Pollard, and he said, fully agree with that.
I don't think you will see it happen because of the other fact that you and I discussed the last time that we appeared together, which is the economic ramifications of what happens.
Yeah.
Iran doesn't care what its citizens think, obviously. In fact, it murders whole scale its citizens. 42,000, we're told, in 48 hours. Iran doesn't care. Israel, of course, does care, but it has to do whatever it needs to do in order to prevent a future war, especially one. Imagine this war if the Iranians had access to a nuclear military capability. My God, we'd be discussing one of the cataclysmic events of modern times. But the other one is the fact, and again, we mentioned it briefly last time, is the fact that there's going to be the midterm elections on November 3rd of this coming year in the United States. And Donald Trump understands his advisors, I'm not talking about his foreign policy advisors, I'm talking about Susan Wiles and others, have told him that there are more people in America who are concerned about what they are paying for the gallon of gas than they are about a declared victory in Iran. And Donald Trump is very concerned. The Republicans cannot afford to lose the midterm elections in November. They cannot afford. Never mind just because the Congress, if they lose the House, Congress, the appropriations of funds for any such war. But there's another concern for Trump. He'll be impeached, not convicted, but impeached. So he has to worry about that. And therefore, any war that goes on too long is not to his advantage. I'm going to remind people that when the first 3 American soldiers died, all of a sudden you had people who ostensibly seemed that they would support the American drive against Iran. All of a sudden we're saying, whoa, 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 3 American soldiers, and that number, by the way, is 13 today. We didn't expect this, and whoa, whoa, we've got to reconsider this. Well, the Iranians pay attention to the American media. The Iranians know exactly what they need to know. And I think the cardinal mistake that Trump made only 72 hours ago is he said, I'm not in favor of a ceasefire, which they seem to be discussing right now anyhow. He said, I'm not in favor of a ceasefire, but this war is going to end very shortly. And if I was one of the bad guys in Iran, and I knew that my adversaries in the United States and in the White House was already planning or talking about having a very short war that's going to end soon, I would sort of tread water and just wait for it to end. That's what I would do. Hopefully, and is the last word because I know the clock is ticking, as it always does with us. Hopefully, Trump will be angry enough it's the type of thing that fuels him, that this will be some kind of ruse, and he and Israel are going to deliver some kind of death blow to the Iranian regime. Given what I've said before, Hamas, the Houthis, Hezbollah, I am not so optimistic that that's going to happen. And I'll remind people one more time that in August of 2006, there was a UN Security Council resolution 1701, which basically said that Hezbollah would demilitarize in southern Lebanon. They would move north of Litani River, and there was going to be peace in southern Lebanon. That was in August of 2006. And I say, as I often do about these things, and how did that turn out? And how did that turn out? Bad guys are by definition, axiomatically, bad guys. They're not to be negotiated with.
Yeah, 100%. 100%. Well, we're going to be watching this very carefully. I'm going to have Jonathan Pollard on again on Wednesday. Earlier in the day, we're certainly going to be dissecting this, but you know, we're watching this minute by minute unfold. This is quite dramatic right now, and you know, very worrisome. Obviously, Mayor, before our last comments, let me just say that may God bless the Israel Defense Forces, and may God bless Israel.
Amen.
Mayor, final comments before we sign off.
A final word is we can't turn what seems to be an inevitable victory if we allow this game to play out. The Iranians have been decapitated. Hezbollah has been decapitated. Hamas is put on hold for the moment. Whatever. Israel, the United States, the West, forget the Western world. They're complicit in this anti-Israel peace, whatever. But the United States and Israel have an opportunity to change history, to make history, to end this threat, this regional threat. And the question is, will future history judge us as having been wise enough not to end this prematurely, or not to hold back? Well, sanctions, yes, sanctions, no. This needs to be the total destruction of a regime. There needs to be a regime change. There needs to be a new Middle East.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Thank you, Mayor. We'll take this up again. We're watching this very carefully, and thank you very much. Everyone who is watching, please share this on whatever social media platform you use. We are live on Twitter, which is known as X, YouTube, and Facebook. If you could share it on whatever platform you use, we'd appreciate that. And if you want to get involved with us, you can send us an email. Go on our website, israelnow.ca. Thank you very much. Thank you, Mayor.
Thank you.